Welcome friends, thanks for stopping by. I am the Lincoln Lawyer. Today we're going to have a fascinating brief chat about one of the most important clauses in any business agreement. Of course, I'm talking about the force majeure, act of God, provision. It's all the same thing, not to worry. So this clause is so important, in fact, that I pretty much include it in nearly every agreement I go through. It is, well, except of course when it's just not prudent. For example, when an agreement can be terminated by either party at any time, then you don't really need it. But otherwise, pretty much every agreement should have a force majeure clause. It is so important, in fact, that in the event that a catastrophic situation occurs through no fault of yours and you are unable to perform the obligations under your agreement, there is a very strong possibility that if your agreement does not have a force majeure clause, that you may be sued and you may be held liable for breach of contract. So it is extremely important to have this particular provision in your agreement, because it will then potentially excuse your performance in case you are unable to perform, because nobody gives a shit if you can't perform. Nobody cares. That's your problem. You signed an agreement, you need to perform. Now, if it's not in the agreement, if you can't find a clause in the agreement to excuse your performance, then you're breaching the agreement, okay? We all try to plan ahead. It's impossible to plan for every single eventuality, but in business, we generally like to plan for unforeseen circumstances in general, and in some situations, they will be invoked, like today, this particular situation with the virus. I'm sure there are a lot of force majeure clauses being invoked in many agreements right now. So we're going to take a look at a generic standard force majeure clause. I'm going to read through it. You should see it pop up on your screen very shortly, and please pay attention. It's important to note that this particular clause and most others will have general statement that excuses performance, such as acts of God, military, governmental ordinances, and then it'll have a specific list of items that will also excuse performances. I need to note that it's very important to include both. Okay, you have to include both, because some courts, in some states, they will excuse performance if it's just a general statement of catastrophe, act of God, etc., that kind of thing, act of government. And other courts, they will require a specific list. So if the particular event does not fall into this specific list, then you may not be excused. So therefore, two lessons. Lesson number one, have a force majeure clause in your agreement, and number two, have both the general and the specific list of specific occurrences in order to make sure that you cross your T's, dot your I's, and your performance is very likely to be excused in the event that one of these things does occur. Okay, so let's read together. In the event that either party is prevented from performing or is unable to perform any of its obligations under this agreement, other than a payment obligation, this is standard, due to any act of God, acts or decrees of governmental or military bodies, that's the general statement. Then here comes the specific: fire, casualty, flood, earthquake, war, strike, lockout, epidemic, destruction of production facilities, riot, insurrection, materials unavailability, or any other cause beyond the reasonable control of the party invoking this section, collectively a force majeure. And if such party shall have used its commercially reasonable efforts to mitigate its effects, such party shall give prompt written notice to the other party, its performance shall be excused, this is mandatory, and the time for the performance shall be extended for the period of delay or inability to perform due to such occurrences, regardless of the excuse of force majeure. If such party is not able to perform within 90 days after such event, the other party may terminate the agreement. That last sentence is optional, it's not really necessary. Also, a lot of these agreements will have a provision that will require the party invoking this clause to ensure that it returns back to the performance of its obligations as soon as possible after the cessation of the event that gave rise to the suspension of the agreement and that excused its performance. Okay, so I'm not going to go through that here. So, okay, wrapping it up very quickly, 3 lessons. Include force majeure clause in your agreement. Okay, period. It's not that complicated. Just do it. Number 2, include a general and a specific list of items that will excuse performance. And number 3, if you noticed in this particular clause, it lists epidemic, okay? Epidemic is going to include things like coronavirus, okay? Epidemic, you can say epidemic, you can say diseases, pandemic, something to the effect of illness, general widespread illness. And so you do want to include that as well. Okay, so if it doesn't include, if this clause did not have that epidemic, or a clause does not have anything that talks about viral outbreak, pandemic, epidemic, illness, disease, whatever, then also, again, you run the risk of not being able to use this clause to excuse performance. And again, you may get sued and you may be held liable for breach of contract. So you really have to make sure that you include everything that can possibly happen to excuse your agreement, because there's a lot of money here, okay? So most of the world is at a standstill right now, okay? Most of the economies, supply lines are frozen, distribution lines are frozen, people are at home, they're staying home, they're not buying, they're not shopping. Pretty much everything is at a standstill. So you have to understand that you're going to be running low on funds to be able to perform. You may be at a loss if you perform, and you need to make sure that you really have a thorough force majeure provision protecting you. So it might be an epidemic this time. It might be something else. It might be a war or a riot, or or a fire, a widespread fire. Anything like that needs to be included, okay, to protect your interests. So this is your business. You don't want to go bankrupt. You don't want to end up in litigation. This is extremely important. A lot of people neglect to do this, so I'm here to tell you, do not neglect the force majeure clause. All right, I'm going to wrap it up right here. I hope this has been informative. I hope you learned something. Like, subscribe. Nice talking to you. Be cool. See you in the next one.